An organization generally creates a business plan as a way to predict how the business will go in future. Essentially, a business plan would be based on demand forecast. So the demand forecast to an extent is the very fundamental part of any business plan. In this will be the topic of this lecture, which will give an overview, an initial overview on the role of demand planning and demand forecasting and the implications of demand planning and demand forecasting, especially in terms of strategy options. What we learned already is that demand forecasting and demand planning will reflect into many operational tools and operational dimension, and specifically will impact on the capacity. What we are going to see now is what is the definition of demand forecasting and how we can use demand forecasting to strategize along the supply chain of our business and also internally in terms of quality management and strategic operational choices. So the first definition will be on specifically demand forecast. Demand forecast became even more important now thanks to computerization in the ability of companies to collect a large amount of data. And by collecting all this data, companies are able not only to analyze the data, but also to increase the collaboration along the supply chain. And in this way, the demand forecast will become more accurate and also passed down, as we are going to see in a few slides, will be passed down along the supply chain so that all the players in the supply chain can take immediate action. The definition of demand forecast essentially is the way to determine how much of each product or how much of each service we need to produce or we need to deliver. Demand forecast will also lead to the determination of inventory that we need to meet our sales target and production target. As we already learned, demand forecast will also tell us what is the capacity of the resources which we need to meet the targets. Demand forecast does have implication also on our finances. So based on demand forecast, then we are able to understand and to budget the working capital that will be needed to run our operations. So we see that essentially demand forecast is the very backbone, is the very scaffolding of every business plan. So we can start from the demand forecast first to build around the demand forecast our business plan. A forecast is, of course, much more complicated than just a number, and that's why we generally use aggregate forecast. So we combine more methodologies together as to ensure higher accuracy for our forecast. We also differentiate different type of forecasts depending on the time horizon, and we need to be aware that in some circumstances, the time is of essence in a sense that a longer time period may heavily affect the accuracy of our forecast. We also need to consider what is the external environment and how the external environment, the system in which we operate, may change and may cause some changes also in our forecasting. Generally, forecasts will assume that there is a so-called underlying stability in the system, an underlying stability in the external environment. So forecasts will, for example, consider that an economy will grow maybe 2 to 4%, and our company will operate within this predicted economic growth. So this is the overall stability which is assumed in our forecast. However, we need to consider that there might be some external disruption. This external disruption will impact, for example, on the economic growth of the economy in which we are based, and this consequently will have consequences on our own forecast. So this is an important takeaway point because business forecasts, the forecast specifically for our business, may vary significantly depending on external circumstances. It is important to consider that we generally prefer to think in terms of aggregate planning in operation management. What is the role of aggregate planning in operation management? Essentially is to determine production and resource allocation as to meet uncertain and fluctuating future needs coming from our market. So when we talk about aggregate planning, aggregate could refer primarily to different product lines, different product families in our business. In planning, we cover all the activities which we need to take as a way to meet the expected demand. So this is the definition of aggregate planning in operation management. Demand forecasting and aggregate planning are two key tools which enable us to build an efficient, reliable, agile supply chain. And this is so because the more we are able to integrate and to exchange information, real-time data along the supply chain, the better we are at serving our customer. And the better we are at avoiding very unfortunate issues which we may encounter in case our demand forecast is poor or our demand forecast is biased by a lack of understanding of customer needs or a lack of understanding of external circumstances. There could be major problems in case we fail to perform an efficient and accurate demand forecast. Could be late orders or even unavailability of products. We may need to rush a project or to expedite the supplies. These will also lead to conflicts between our clients and our company as suppliers, or between us and our suppliers in case we are the one purchasing goods or services from vendors. A bad demand forecast can also end up in wasted capital that will be tied up in the inventory. So our stock, which cannot be used, and so that would affect the working capital, will also affect the cash flow of our organization because we're using a lot of capital just to stock items which we are not able to sell, and this consequently will make our cash flow suffer. So this is a powerful visualization of what could be the effect of a weak demand forecast. So in case we are over forecasting, meaning we predict higher demand than the actual demand, so this will lead to an overproduction and consequently higher production costs. This also leads to excess inventory with our capital being tied up in the inventory and with consequent struggles in terms of cash flow because we are not able to sell the inventory. And when you get to a point where you must sell your inventory, either because the products are becoming obsolete or because you don't have enough space or because you need to rearrange your facilities, then you will end up selling your products at a discounted price with all the consequences on your finances. Inventory cost Spoilage, waste, obsolescence, all of these are the consequences of an over forecast. At the same time, we also have issues when it comes to under forecast. So the under forecast will lead to underproduction, will lead to inventory shortage, will lead to late deliveries, will lead to being stock out, missing out opportunities, higher shipping costs, higher costs when we need to expedite a production or expedite a project, and so on. So this, in one slide, is a summary of all the bad consequences that can originate from a weak demand forecast. As you can see here, it's not only specifically related to our company internally, but it's more of a supply chain kind of effect. So a bad demand forecast does carry a lot of consequences for all the companies in a specific supply chain. On the other side, an accurate forecast will determine the right inventory level. And a right forecast will lead to a very important concept in light of Industry 4.0 application, which is the concept of continuous replenishment. What is this concept? It's essentially the sharing of updated data between supplier and customers so that all companies can be at the same time aware of what is going on and they can plan accordingly. This continuous replenishment generally is managed by supplier. This will lead to reduce inventory for the company and also will speed up the delivery to the customer. Other possibilities resulting from the adoption of continuous replenishment, which is possible primarily due to the adoption of IoT technologies or sensor that can detect in real time what's going on in the company, and big data would be the quick response. So being able to respond faster to market needs, shifting to a just-in-time production, shifting to vendor-managed inventory rather than a company-managed inventory, and also potentially leading to stockless inventory. I mentioned earlier, we do have different type of time horizons when we conduct our forecast. And depending on the time horizon, there will be some substantial differences and also diverse technique which will be used for the forecast. So the first one is the short range, short time forecast. This generally does not exceed a year, could be even just a few months. Here, the purpose, the objective, which we want to achieve with our forecast will be to plan for our procurement and purchasing, planning for procuring raw materials or procuring new tools for our operations or procuring vendor services for our operation and so on. This also matters in terms of scheduling of job activities, in hiring the workforce, in assigning overtime to some of our workforce in case we are facing a higher demand, and of course, the overall production level. For the medium range forecast, this is generally from several months up to 2-3 years, not exceeding 3 years. Here, the purpose are slightly different. So there will be purpose of sales. So our sales target, our production target, and of course, the budgeting. Consider that generally companies will do the budgeting year by year. So at the end of the year, you will be preparing the budget for the next year. In some cases, at the end of a fiscal year, you are preparing the budget for 2 years after, let's say at the end of 2022, preparing the budget for 2024. So this shows you how important is the demand forecasting, because if you do not prepare the budget based on an accurate demand forecasting, then you may encounter some challenges in terms of your daily operations. Imagine you predicted a lower demand. Consequently, you also forecast a lower budget. And when you face a higher demand and you are unable to satisfy the demand because you did not reserve enough budget to face the demand. These will eventually lead into budget revision, which is possible in companies, but is sort of extraordinary measure. It's additional workload, which will touch many departments, not only finance department, but again, HR, operation department, marketing department, and so on. And will increase the overall cost, reduce productivity of the operations. Finally, we have a long-range forecast. This is anything between 3 to 5 years. And this type of forecast is a more strategic kind of forecast. So here we just would like to focus on our new product development, planning for new product development, planning for the location where we are going to conduct our new product development, planning for our research in development. So as you can see, this long-term horizon, it's really intertwined with strategic decisions of our organization. Demand forecast is also crucial in terms of product life cycle. So we can plot the demand forecast towards our product life cycle, and we can identify where the demand forecast is particularly important. And that would be specifically during the growth stage of our product life cycle. This is when we cross that line between the prototype stage, the very early stage, the stage when we are exploring with our new product whether there is an actual demand. This is the stage of early adoption of a new innovation. And when we enter into the subsequent stage, which is the growth stage, this is when a product is entering into the mass market stage. And here, forecasting is critical. Forecasting is critical because from an operational perspective, from an operational process perspective, we are moving from a project or maybe a job shop process. We are moving into a batch production or an assembly line production. And here, complexity, capacity planning are so much more relevant. And thereby, we need much more accurate forecasting. During this stage, we also know who our customer are. We have a very clear idea because we already validated our innovation. So we know our customer, we know who we are, we know how many of them are ready to buy our products. So as you can see, forecast as usual will be deeply linked to our capacity. Essential forecasting because we are increasing the capacity. And as you can see in the two following stages, the maturity stage, in the decline stage, we see some different approaches from capacity perspective. So in maturity stage, we reach an optimum capacity, meaning that forecasts would probably be a little easier at that point. Since we reach the maturity stage, there is no much growth. We are kind of at the plateau of the curve, of the S curve of a product life cycle. So there is no much growth and not even much decline. So it's kind of stable. So it will be much easier at this point to do the demand forecast. In this case, we may even just base the demand forecast on the past year sales and assume that this year's sales will be +2%, +3%. Then we enter into the decline stage. This is when our product become obsolete. And by becoming obsolete, eventually the demand for that product will decline. Most likely during the decline stage, there is some new product that is at early stage. There is a new product life cycle that is just beginning now. So when we enter the decline stage, and actually here, between maturity and decline stage, here, the good forecaster should predict when we are moving into the decline stage. So when we are in the decline stage, the problem is of overcapacity. And here, our demand forecast should tell us when we should start reducing the capacity and progressively be able to shift to the new product life cycle. How can we conduct our forecast? This is a step-by-step guidance on how to make the forecast. So we need to determine the objective and the use of a forecast. We need to select the items that are going to be forecasted. We need to determine the time horizon of a forecast. And then the methodologies of a forecast. And then at this point, we will gather the data, we make the actual forecast, and then we will move into the validation of the results and the evaluation of a forecast. As you can see, the product life cycle can heavily impact on the forecast steps. If we are in the early stage, if we are in the growth stage, if we are in the mature stage, time horizon is different. And consequently, our forecast will be also different. What methodologies can be deployed in forecasting? One set of methodology is qualitative methodologies. These are generally used at the early stage of our product life cycle. And this is because we don't have many data. We cannot use mathematical methodology at this stage. So for new products, new innovations, new technologies, we use qualitative methodology. In all the other cases, we can use quantitative methodology, which means that these are forecasts determined using numerical information. In some circumstances, we can combine both. We can have some qualitative forecasts supported by quantitative forecast. In conclusion, two final points to consider is the relationship between forecasting and quality management, and the relationship between forecasting and strategic planning. Forecasting can help also ensure higher quality of our products. Let me give you an example. A restaurant which failed to predict the demand. They predicted 50 as a demand, and they got 80 customers. And customers want to be served. They want to be served fast. And consequently, the restaurant needs to expedite the cooking and service operation. And then the result will be poorer quality. Lower quality in cooking, lower quality in servicing the customers. So there is also this probably less obvious relationship between forecasting and quality. A good forecast ensures good quality delivered to the customers. The second one is forecasting with strategy. Especially when it comes to the long-term horizon, it's important to have a good forecast on new product development or when to introduce a new product in the market. If the forecast is weak, then we may miss the right opportunity to enter into the market. So to sum up what we learned in this video, first we learned what is specifically the demand forecast. Then we learned the role of demand forecast from a supply chain perspective. We learned the role of demand forecast in the context of Industry 4.0 why right now demand forecast is so much more essential than even 5 or 10 years ago. And this is because now we do have the technology to analyze the data in real time and share the data in real time along the supply chain. We also learned that the product life cycle and the S-curve of innovation do have a strong impact on the choices of forecast. And finally, we consider the relationship between quality management and demand forecast and strategy and demand forecast. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video. Bye.